Welcome back to another episode of Human Powered. I'm Jen Rubin, and I'm here with my colleague, Jessica Becker.
Hi, everybody.
So, we're going to be talking with Yia Lor today, and I'm excited about the conversation. And it really hits kind of what we're trying to do with this podcast is to interview people around the state who are just deeply engaged in their communities with kind of the tools of the humanities, whether it's storytelling, whether it's art, whether it's any kinds of thing to create healthier civic spaces, to knit together tighter as a community. And so I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation about how she comes about it through both storytelling and nature walks.
We got to know Yia years ago. I think, Jen, you produced a story for Love Wisconsin that was based on or inspired by a piece she included in a book called Hope is the Thing. We're kind of excited to get to talk to her in person after following her stories for years.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Oh, good morning, Nia. It's really nice to meet you in person. I've heard your voice on Wisconsin Life for years, and I'm thrilled to be sitting down with you this morning. Thanks for being
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here and just to share a little bit more about who I am and what's going on in my neck of the woods. So, yeah.
Well, I'm really excited to see you over a Zoom square again. I think I interviewed you for Love Wisconsin story during the pandemic. You had a story in it was that book Hope is a Thing.
Mhm.
And it was like what was getting people through the pandemic. And you had this really incredible story, I thought. I think we titled it, I Want to Be the Seed That Continues. And you really talked about like how gardening, and particularly across the generations, and bringing your mother's gardening experience in Laos to the Chippewa Valley. It was just such a lovely story, and we'll put a link to it for people to see. So I'm just really interested to hear you talk about how like that gardening work that was so important to you sort of leads into what you're doing right now. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. So thanks for joining.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good to see you again, Jen. Yeah, so my background is I feel like I'm a Jane of all trades. I feel like I do a little bit of everything, and much of that has to do with just my family, my connection to my family, my connection to the land, to my ancestors. And so I have a lot of gratitude, and just so much. What an honor, right? What an honor to be here and to be able to share this work with you. So I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer from the Chippewa Valley. My background is in social work, and so I come from a helping profession. And I think that at the heart of it all, though, I'm a storyteller, and I'm really what my role has been in all of the careers that I've ever been in is to really reconnect people with who they are. I'm a forest therapy guide. I work in a mental health program, and for those who aren't familiar with forest therapy, it's this really gentle practice of bringing ourselves back to nature, remembering that we are also nature ourselves as well too. It's this invitation to slow down, to tune in to nature around us and then within us as well. Because sometimes we forget that. We forget that we are also nature. And what I love about forest therapy is it encourages us to be curious. What I tell people is that, anytime you step foot into the forest, she will offer you what it is that you are needing, what you are seeking. And I'll often tell people that, we might walk into the same forest, we might walk the same trail, but we might get um, a different lesson. We might get the wisdom might sound different.
That reminds me of something that you said talking about the Hmong gardening that was part of your childhood, and I think it was during the pandemic in one of the stories you shared on Wisconsin Life about leaving the garden and giving someone something, maybe some seeds or some vegetables, watermelon, I think it was, slices of
Mhm.
watermelon, and receiving a bouquet. And afterward, you said it reminded me that we exist for each other.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I keep sort of noticing and being touched by is like that there's this individual sort of finding and belonging as a current through your stories, but also the importance of community and that we're humans that are meant to be together. And that's something that the kinds of, Wisconsin humanities kinds of programming and the sort of larger goals of public humanities program is like how to bring people together. So I
Mhm.
don't know, like how are you seeing those two things working together?
Yeah, so in my work as a forest therapy guide, I work primarily in this mental health program, and it serves individuals who are in recovery. And I'm transparent about, my background as well too. I myself am actively in recovery as well. And I think that the common thread that I've seen that ties each and every single individual that I have worked with so far in this program, that ties all of us together, is that we can feel incredibly lonely and unsure of how to build those meaningful connections. And so, again, as someone who's in recovery too, I understand the feelings of wanting to isolate, right? And how comforting that can be in the moment. But the reality is that we're human beings, and we are deeply, deeply social creatures, right? And so we are meant to live in community. We are meant to be in community. We are meant to heal in community. And I think a lot about how so Hmong people, we come from a collective culture, and the belief that we belong to each other, right? And so the reality is that, again, human beings, we are very, very social creatures. And so we're meant to be in community. And yes, there are times where we can maybe pull back and have some time to ourselves to regroup. Um, Maybe it is to grieve, maybe it is to process. But we ultimately are meant to be in community. We're meant to heal in community. And so I think about just the importance of that, especially in the world that we live in today. Um, and there are so many factors in as to why we may feel more disconnected than ever before. And I think people are craving that sense of belonging. And belonging is so crucial too in the recovery process. We know that from what research shares is that people who feel social isolation, people who feel lonely, they're more likely to experience relapse, and we see an increase in anxiety, an increase in depression when that happens. And so it's again, how do we build those connections again with each other, right? And it doesn't have to be these like big, grand um, actions, just the small, tiny, consistent um, actions can be so meaningful. They build up after a time.
Yeah, there's so many wise things you just said in that, and so there's a lot of different threads I could jump on. But there's one thing that you said earlier that I was thinking about, and I think we'll hopefully get into like how you bring your storytelling into these forest therapy walks. But you said something about how you approach the work. It's like you're helping people reconnect with who they are. And so my friend Tequila Benton and I, we do a storytelling workshop every year with Chrysalis, which is in Madison. It's a substance abuse and mental health recovery group as well. And it's it's so clear how health folks like have the tools to tell their own story how they want to, and to do that with their peers, doing feedback with their peers to get to their best story is like so powerful for people. And so I think you're sort of doing that, but as you're walking in nature, is that kind of part of it, which just feels like, obviously like a huge added bonus to the experience. And so I'd love to hear a little more about like how is it you do those nature walks? Are you walking as a group? Is it like a group experience, or is it you and one person?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, like Jen, oh my goodness, like I think the work that you're doing is amazing. Like we should spend some time talking about that,
I'd
just
love
how,
to. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the way that I do forest therapy, I was largely trained to offer group walks. And so I had initially started off offering it to the community, but then it worked out for me to offer it to individuals in this mental health program. And so I've been doing that for the last few years, and all of that is one-on-one. The way it works is I show up and so first I want to say that forest therapy, we often, when people hear forest therapy, they think we have to be outside in the forest. And I love that kind of walk, but forest therapy can happen anywhere. And so right now it's winter in Wisconsin. It has been incredibly cold. And I've been doing a lot of forest therapy walks indoors, and we can bring nature inside. We have to remember too, again, that we are also nature. Nature is all around us. It's really great when I can bring people outside though, get some fresh air in your lungs, be surrounded by the trees. I think those are probably my favorite kinds of walks. And so I can just talk through, what a typical walk is like, and then kind of how we weave in our stories, right? And how do we rewrite our stories in that space. So, a typical walk starts with me and an individual, and we will approach some land, whether it's at their home or on a trail somewhere else. And we always start off with a little bit of some gentle movement, just to kind of move the energy in the body, kind of shifting a little bit. And then we start to ground ourselves into the space. And we do this through sensory meditation, coming back into our body as well too, really anchoring ourselves into the breath. And then again, being aware of our senses and how we are taking in the forest. And then from there, we start to move through these nature invitations. And the nature invitations are, they're I would say they're gentle reflections that ask us to really look at our inner landscape. And so one of the nature invitations I may offer up is um, notice two colors that are next to each other and how do they belong, right? So that might be the nature invitation. And then we will spend anywhere between like 10 to 15 minutes wandering out in nature. And then we'd come back after that time and we'd have some time to reflect. And I think that what's been for me just a really beautiful process is witnessing individuals be able to take those reflections and use nature, right, in order to really reflect on what's happening internally and with their own story too. And so when I offer this up, someone might say, well, I see these two colors maybe on this log. Maybe it's a piece of moss, right, growing alongside, I don't know, the bark or something. And so you're witnessing two colors coming together and how do they build community? How do they belong? Right. And so then from there, individuals might reflect on what is it within myself, right? Do I see myself as the moss, the bark, or something else outside of that? How do I belong, right? And then from there, they can really reflect on what's happening in their lives as well, too. And nature is just, again, what I've told folks before is that we can walk into the same space and nature might give us something different. We could do the same reflection. We could do the same nature invitation, and you might get something different based on what it is, how you're approaching the practice, what it is that you're needing in that moment. And I think what's beautiful about this practice is that it allows us to see again the stories that are living within ourselves, to pull those out, and then to really work with them in this space that is amazing at holding all of us and all of the parts of us, because nature continuously tells us that we belong, right? We belong. There is space for everything.
Mm. Yeah, that's really beautiful. You know, I think that part of what is so wonderful about how you share from your own stories and your own life is that it's very personal, but there are things that we can all relate to, like growing up and feeling like your mom was like a weirdo, and then realizing as you aged and became an adult, like all the wisdom she carried and all of the ways that you learned from that, and truly seemingly are sort of following in her footsteps, imparting some of that wisdom in the world. And so yeah, I see your mom as a real character in your stories. And I wonder what she thinks about this thing you mentioned about, how in Hmong community we all belong together and we take care of each other, and how those individual stories weave together, and how you see that now working what you're doing out in the world professionally, kind of coming back in your Hmong community.
Yeah, I think that my mom is in a lot of my stories because my mom has been such a big part of my story, right? And I was just talking with someone about this. I think anytime I meet someone new, who's going to be working with me in the practice of forest therapy, often the question I get is, what led you to this? Like, how did you get into this? What is forest therapy and how come nature? Like, what is it that draws you to this? This is really, and they're often fascinated by it, but they also want to know, what is your why? What is your reasoning? How did you get here? And I was sitting in my parents' backyard, and my parents had a little plot of land in their yard, and my mom was gardening, and I was watching her garden. And my mom and I have been on such a journey together. As a very young child, I interpreted for my mom in many different settings, and I've had to watch her in these spaces, right? And just witness how she was engaging with the world and how the world was engaging with her back. And so I was watching my mom, and she was in the garden, and I got to thinking, gosh, how do I support my mom in reconnecting with who she is? So much of my work within the social work profession was really dedicated to working with the Hmong community. And much of the work that I was doing was trying to bring services to a community that was underserved, and really trying to bridge that gap. And so, as someone who is a Hmong professional in my community and also a Hmong community member too, I wanted to be able to lift my community and believe that. And I think that this is something that many people in my community believe that is, which is that when one of us succeeds, we all succeed. And so it's like, how can I go back into a community that has lifted me all of these years, right? That has helped me all of these years? How can I go back into that space and lift them as well too? As an adult, a young adult, sitting in my parents' backyard, watching my mom gardening, I got to thinking, how can I support my mom in just, coming back to herself? And that's where I started thinking more about nature. And so I got to thinking about my mom and how I've brought her many of these different practices that I have trained in over the years, and nothing seemed to just really connect with her. But then watching her out there in the garden, um, it made me think a lot about, for my mom, her being in the garden is a connection back to who she is. And I think about like when I am barefoot in the garden, I immediately go back to my childhood of playing. And so then I think, okay, mom's in the garden and she is growing all of these traditional Hmong veggies. And when she is in that space, maybe it brings her back to her childhood. And my mom grew up in war and poverty. And so I think about like just the trauma, that she's had to endure. And what I really wanted to do was to be able to bring my mom back home to herself. And I think that's where the practice of forest therapy came in. I think that at the core of it all is us trying to remember who we are. And maybe in that process, also getting to rewrite parts of our stories that we don't feel as that we're as connected to us anymore.
One of the things that shows up a lot in how you talk about your work is that, human beings are meant to be in community. We're not sort of alone in this world, and that we're sort of better in community. And, we're in this moment in time. So we're recording this at this moment in time where, the federal government is fully occupying Minneapolis. And we're seeing the people in Minneapolis do all kinds of amazing things together. Their support, like my daughter lives in St. Paul. She said like every neighborhood has like a vigil, you know, and everyone's like someone who's good at songs or makes little zines of songs people can sing that's dispersed. People are um, providing rent for people who can't leave their homes, right? So it's this moment, you know, like absolute power is crushing down on them, but it's these pockets of community and mutual aid. So I just sort of had that in the back of my mind as you're talking. And so, yeah, I'd just love to hear your reflections on that because it's an area that you're very thoughtful about.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And my goodness, right? What a heavy time we are living in. And something that I've been talking a lot with folks about is like, how much do I, stay in the know and then also balance my own mental health as well too. And
Hmm.
I think right now, the way I'm doing it with both is being in community, is being able to process with my community, right? Being able to process, I mean, I think sometimes there is certainly space to process on your own. And I think that can be helpful too. And then I think there's also space to process with others, and to feel like you're not alone because we most certainly are not. And I think, you know, sometimes the heaviness of the world, I'm a creator. And so when the world feels heavy, sometimes I isolate and I think, my goodness, what am I doing? What am I doing that is actually going to move the needle on anything? Why am I sitting in nature, right? Like I come back to that. And sometimes, and when I'm in that state, it can feel like, my goodness, yeah, what you're doing doesn't matter. But I think that this is where we really have to challenge some of those stories that are running through, right? Because I think this is the moment where we create. This is a moment where we create, whether they're stories, whether they are whether it's our art, whether it's community, right? That all of this creation leads to something so much more beautiful that can truly heal the world. And I do believe that even though the world can feel so heavy, like right now, you see the communities, like Jen, you were talking about communities that are creating, right? Creating pockets of safety, right? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? And that's all done in community. It's not done in isolation. And I think it's when we can show up for ourselves, for each other. Something that I talk about with all of the individuals I work with, in recovery, and this is very true for myself too, being in recovery. The hardest thing that we can do sometimes is to show up for ourselves. And so when we are working in this space together, co-creating this space, right? When I'm working with individuals, we talk a lot about holding ourselves accountable because there is someone else waiting on us. And so when
Mm,
we show up for ourselves, we are also showing up for others as well too. And so I think about like what I'm seeing happening in Minneapolis, what I'm seeing unfolding are people, human beings, showing up for other human beings as well. And again, it doesn't have to be some grand gesture. It can happen very, very small scale too. And that can hold so much meaning as well. And we're seeing that. We are seeing that, right?
yeah, yeah. It's like that piece of when you know yourself, then you know what you have to offer, and then you
Yeah.
can click in to the larger community. And so there is that balance, I think, between um, sort of being mentally healthy, being socially healthy go hand in hand, right? And
Mhm.
so taking care of that individual journey is part of taking care of our larger collective journey.
Mhm.
So I think you've
Yeah.
spoken to that really beautifully. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I really appreciate hearing how you talk about this, and I think it's always just like really great when someone figures out how to take like their personal history, their talents, and like put it towards like a socially community useful way that is both rewarding for you and everyone else. So I thank you for role modeling that for all of us. That was lovely to hear um, about the work you're doing and how you're doing it. And I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here and just being able to share more about what's happening, on the grounds. Um, this has been just such rewarding work, and especially having launched it after the pandemic, right? And seeing what people were leaving the pandemic with, and that was this great sense of isolation. But just being in this position of really helping guide individuals back into being a little bit closer to who they are, right? Bringing them back home. So, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know you are pretty tied to the writing community in Eau Claire. And
Mhm.
so we'll put a link in the show notes to the book that was a collection of essays put together during the pandemic. Hope is the Thing. And there's a piece of yours in there. And I just want to say thanks again for all that you're doing and for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys.
Wow, I really enjoyed that. It was such a nice twist on thinking about the role of storytelling and the importance of both individual health and community health and how the two work together, especially in these times when we can sometimes feel kind of guilty about taking care of ourselves. Really great conversation.
I really like learning about like how she came at this work is like deeply rooted in the experience of her parents who came here, you know, from Laos. And I really feel like the more like specific people are about taking their cultural lessons and building from that and applying it, like the more it actually resonates with like a large number of people. So I'm not really sure if I'm saying this well, but I appreciate learning like where her work is rooted in.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great conversation that led to a lot of other thoughts. So we're certainly going to put some links in the notes. And we want to thank Chrissy Widmeyer, who is the audio engineer and editor of our Human Powered series. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks. So share this episode and remember to subscribe. Thanks for being here.